Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm your host, Amanda Lamb. In today's conversation with WRAL's 5 on Your Side reporter, Keely Arthur, we're talking about the new post-pandemic world of tipping. So it started during the pandemic as a way to reward frontline workers, but it seems to be hanging around long after the crisis has ended. It seems like every transaction we make now comes with a request to tip at a higher rate than ever before, even when the person serving us is doing little more than just ringing up our purchase. According to a recent survey, 66% of Americans have a negative view on tipping. What is the correct thing to do? Keely is here to help us navigate this. Keely, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
So during the pandemic, we all wanted to help out. We wanted to tip extra, even on takeout, because these were frontline workers. But now I feel like you get prompted at the register. I mean, you get a drip coffee and they turn around that iPad and even just where it starts, it's like starting at 20% and going up.
Have you seen 5, 10, 15 ever?
No. And so it's a lot of pressure. So what is the etiquette here?
So it really is case by case. Obviously, as the consumer, it is up to you, but there are some good boundaries to kind of think about where you are. Restaurants, for example, will pay their staff. If you have a tipped staff or staff that would earn tips, you can pay them as little as $2.13 in North Carolina. So knowing where you are these employees making minimum wage? Are they making more than that? And just, it's really tough, but I think knowledge is power here. So when you step up to the cash register and that tablet is swung around, okay, I'm at a spa, I should tip this amount. I'm at a restaurant, I should tip that amount. And also you need to not feel awkward about saying
about not tipping. I mean, I think that turning around the iPad thing really started during the pandemic, right?
It did. And as a way to help everybody, right? Because we couldn't go to restaurants anymore. So we were tipping 30%. We knew those workers were being hit incredibly hard. So people were stepping in. And, the pandemic, in a lot of ways, the masks, the social distancing, that's gone away. This tipping has just stayed, and it's blown up. Somebody called it a tip invasion. So
I mean, I feel like I think I was asked to tip recently at a retail store. When I just pulled something off the rack and I purchased it, and I'm thinking, well, what was it that person did to help me make that decision? If they were walking around with me, bringing me things into the dressing room, that would be different. Right. But this was not that situation.
That's what's happening. Companies don't see a downside to this in a lot of ways when you look at the numbers, because at a retail store, if somebody is going to give an extra 10%, wouldn't you take it if you were the business owner? So
sure. And then the question is, are the employees getting the tips? Because I think that's a question I always have, when I tip on the iPad, are they getting them?
Yeah. And I'll tell you this story. So this was a story that we were looking into. Somebody had said to me anecdotally at the Durham Bulls games, for example, the games that were during the weekdays, the people were tipping so much on the tablets, the customers, that some of the workers who were working Tuesday, Thursday games during the week left and didn't show up for Saturday because they were earning so much in tips, they didn't need to go pick up the next shift on the weekend.
Wow.
So it is making it to the workers.
Employees. Well, that's good. We'll be back with much more after the break. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. So, one of the main reasons to tip, obviously, is if somebody, like you were saying, at a restaurant is not making a living wage and they depend on the tips for their livelihood. And I know that you spoke to Scott Holmes about this. Tell me what Scott does. And what did he tell you about living wages, minimum wage, things like that? Yeah,
Scott is an attorney and a professor, and he looks at cost of living, equality. And so we want people listening to this to think about the tip from that standpoint. So the cost of living is much higher than what people earn in minimum wage. I don't think minimum wage hasn't changed for years anyone living out in the world can tell, the cost of living has certainly gone up. So if you're mad about this tip invasion, think about where you are. Do not take it out on servers, maybe hotel staff, people who have always traditionally worked for tips and are paid on the very low end. You can definitely take it out or decide not to tip at, like your example, at a retail store. No. At coffee houses, maybe a little. Throw some money in the tip jar. I've started carrying cash around me a lot more.
I was going to say, most people don't have cash. So that's where this tipping coercion comes in, because you don't have cash.
And you feel the pressure. The person, not only is the worker looking at you, you have the people behind you at the line at the coffee house. That's so much pressure. Even in doing this story, I was at a chocolate shop and I was asked to tip. They didn't do anything except for ringing up something. But I felt, even I'm telling people, be vigilant. You don't need to tip everywhere. And I still did.
And I know these are some of the numbers from your reporting, that a living wage is $16.83 an hour, but minimum wage is $7.25 an hour here in North Carolina. And that legal wage in places where you get tips is as low as $2.13. I mean, it might even be worth, if you frequent a business, saying to the owner, I'd like to know what you pay your employees per hour, so that you could then maybe think about, okay, how do I want to tip?
Yeah, because again, companies are going to take, as long as you're going to keep tipping, companies, of course, are going to take this. But if you start asking questions or decide not to, you can help break the cycle. But a business is going to take the money as much as they can get.
So let's go through the list, because you did really come up with some good suggestions for people. So a sit-down restaurant, a hair salon, or a spa, what's the percentage?
Do 20%. I think that's pretty traditional, and that is good. And that's because these are people who are providing a personal service for you. Restaurants, that's because you should pay tips because of the low wages.
The low wage.
But a salon or a spa, you're getting personal one-on-one attention with a person who probably has a license in whatever service they're doing. Tip them.
And they rely on those. So then, of course, a lot of us take Ubers, and a lot of us get meal delivery, from different services. What kind of a tip should we think about?
You should tip them 15%. A lot of the people who, for example, are bringing your groceries to your door now, they are making pretty low wage, maybe minimum wage, and they have to go and haul everything, make sure they get the order right. It's a pretty labor-intensive, gas, all of that. So they definitely deserve a tip. And same with your Uber driver. You should tip them as well, like you would do maybe in a taxi.
Cab, sure. And then takeout. I'm talking about you walk into the restaurant and you get a bag of food to go. You have no idea who's packed that bag. You don't know if the person at the register's packed it, but somebody packed it. And again, this is where we were tipping really high during the pandemic, but we can bring that down a little now.
You can bring it down. Yeah, I think during the pandemic, because we didn't get table service, you were tipping like you were getting table service.
Sure.
So 20%, maybe 30% because you felt really bad for everybody. Takeout now, you can do 10%, but really like curbside. So if you're sitting in the car, someone's bringing that out to you, definitely tip them. But if you're going to, you ordered a bagel online and you're going to the bagel shop, you don't necessarily need to tip, and you can ask. I mean, I know it's kind of an awkward situation, but it's your money, and they should be able to provide you with answers as to where that tip goes.
Absolutely, because a lot of times places also pool the tips,
right?
So it affects everybody who works in that establishment. And then things like at hotels, valet, bellhops, housekeeping, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think $5 or $10, maybe a couple bucks every night for housekeeping. Remember, those workers, if you're staying at a hotel for multiple days, it's not going to be the same person every day. So try to tip a little bit each night, or each morning if you can.
And then, I think it gets confusing about where we don't tip. I remember, and you didn't cover this in the story, but there was always a thought you don't tip the highest on alcohol because alcohol is marked way up. But again, you're in a bar, you're in a cafe, and usually we do tip the person that makes us a drink or brings us a drink.
And you don't need to go percentage then. You can do like a few
just
dollars.
What you think. So is there times when it's just okay not to tip? And we've talked a little bit about that, but it sounds like there probably are.
Yeah, I think one thing that I thought was funny, and a wedding and it's open bar or something like that, there's always a tip jar. But those workers are definitely getting paid already. There's a service charge tacked on to the wedding. So you don't need to tip there.
And most people don't bring, especially a woman who's dressed up, is probably not going to have a pocket with cash in it.
Right. Yeah. So don't feel obligated there. I think that sometimes you'll see websites now where you're ordering things online and there's a tip tacked on. Go in and delete that. Don't tip there.
So use your own discretion. And I will say the one thing I do like is when they convert the percentage into the dollar amount for what I'm purchasing, because that makes me think about, okay, that's $3 or that's $5. So that's a nice benefit of the iPad. But I do think you're right. We need to use our own discretion.
And it's everywhere.
It is.
And so please don't feel like you have to tip everywhere, and please don't forget about the people that we've always traditionally tipped. They still need it.
That's really good advice. Keely, thank you so much for answering these questions that so many of us have but are afraid to ask. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. If you'd like to hear more about things to do, places to visit, and restaurants to enjoy in North Carolina, check out WRAL Out and About, a weekly podcast from WRAL News. Find WRAL Out and About in your podcast app. As always, thanks for listening.